I'm Joshua Roberts of Biz News, and with me for today's currency focus is TreasuryOne's Andre Cilliers. The rand has been relatively steady against all the major currencies over the past 2 weeks or so. What are the driving factors behind the performance of the rand in the last few weeks, Andre?
Well, in the last few weeks, nothing has really changed. The drivers are still the Federal Reserve and their decisions surrounding tapering, what they will do regarding interest rates, and how the employment figures gel out that influences them. But over the last couple of days, we've got some Turkish delight flavoring into the rand here, with the Turkish coming in, hiking interest rates. So did Russia. But out of Turkey, there's also the rumors of firing 10 of their ministers, and that creates a little bit of havoc in terms of emerging market space. And we have seen the rand giving back some 20 cents since Friday to the levels where we are trading today.
There's been more issues at Transnet, with Tungela and Sasol both coming out last week outlining that Transnet's incompetence is resulting in tens of millions of rands in lost exports. If our commodity producers continue to have a problem exporting their product, will this have a damaging effect to the rand?
That will certainly have a damaging effect of the rand, because, we can produce as much as we want to. If we can't deliver it on the other side and get payment for our exports, it is a problem. But one must immediately just add here that it's not just in South Africa that we have these kinds of problems. We have problems in terms of harbors and the logistics side right throughout the world, in China, in America, wherever. You can call the names and they have logistical problems, and it's a container problem. It's a compounding problem in getting goods to the final user at the end. And if it continues, definitely it will have an impact both on your trade figures and on the rand.
There's important policy decisions to come out of not only the South African Reserve Bank, but central banks around the world in the coming months. Focusing specifically on the US, if there's a rate hike by Fed Jerome Powell before the South African Reserve Bank announces one, what will that do to the rand?
If there's an announcement in the US increasing interest rates before the South African Reserve Bank, then that would be, I think, a little bit negative towards the rand, and we could see the value of the currency lose somewhat of its value. I very much doubt whether that will happen. I think the Reserve Bank will be in a position to move before the Federal Reserve, as the Federal Reserve has got quite a little bit of tapering to do. And when one speaks about tapering, that's a buyback of all the money that they've pushed into the markets during their quantitative easing programs. And before they've done that and tapered off on that stimulus packages that they've put into, on that quantitative easing packages, they will not move on interest rates.
You talked about Turkish delight earlier. What is the correlation between the Turkish lira and the rand, and why are we moving negatively with the Turkish lira?
Well, the Turkish lira, the Turkish lira, the rand, the Brazilian real, all those emerging markets currencies is actually correlated to each other to a greater or lesser extent. And whenever there's a hiccup in either of the emerging markets, you will have an influence, as I say, to a greater or a lesser extent in all your other emerging markets. So not a direct correlation, but because they all fall within the emerging market space, there will be a move in tandem. If the one moves, the others will also move.
What are the technical analysis charts telling us about the rand dollar price action over the short term, Andre?
Okay, short term, it's telling us that we could be testing the upper band of 15 again, but chances are that it will fail at that level and retreat back down to levels of around 14.5, 14.60. So the technical side tells us that we will be, for the next 2 to 3 months, remain within a band of 14.40 to 15.10, with more or less oscillating around, call it the midpoints, around the 14.70 level.
And what are the biggest risks to the rand? Why wouldn't they follow the patterns that you've just pronounced?
Why would they not follow the patterns? The outside risks is a disastrous outcome in terms of our election, a disastrous weekend of turmoil before the elections or directly thereafter. I give that a very, very slim chance. And then obviously, the biggest risk lies to the side of what happens internationally if we see a very quick and sudden change from the Federal Reserve. But if you look at the history on the Federal Reserve and the way they've acted over the last couple of years, once again, it's a very, very slim chance that something like that will happen. We didn't speak too much about China. We have to watch China very, very carefully as well. They have a massive debt problem. We all know about the Evergrande situation. We know that their corporate debt stands at 280%, some 280% of GDP. And that's a really sticky little toffee into the economy of the Chinese. We have seen their GDP figures coming in slightly below the 5% last week. So their growth, not as much as what everybody expected it to be. Definitely a slowdown. I've mentioned that there's also problems in their logistical side in terms of harbors, etc. They have been asked to close some of their factories or work lesser hours. They've been asked to close some of their shops to shorter shopping hours, and that will have an impact on the Chinese economy. If that comes down and the GDP comes even in a lot lower, it will also definitely be negative for emerging markets.
Why is China so important to the rand volatility?
It is one of our biggest trading counterparts, apart from Europe and the US. We do import and export a heck of a lot to China, especially on the commodity side. So any really big slowdown in the Chinese economy and change in the demand levels, specifically on the commodity side, will dramatically impact on our mining sector and also on our retail sector. So by far, because it's such a big trading counterpart with us, big impact if they slow down.